I've made a couple of videos in the past talking about how ridiculously stupid modern Spider-Man comic books are outside of the Ultimate Universe, okay? Now, there are a few side universes. The Ultimate Universe I thought was good. There was Renew Your Vows, which I thought was fun. Some people didn't like it. I enjoyed it. But in general, the 616 mainline Spider-Man comics and the characters around Spider-Man, except maybe Miles Morales, who has somehow skirted by and done fine, they mostly have bad stories nowadays. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. One of the things it goes back to is One More Day, but a lot of people say that it goes all the way back to the Clone Saga. I personally still enjoyed that. We still got cool characters like Kane, Ben Reilly, and others from it. But long story short, we're at a point now where editorial around Spider-Man as a character and the characters that surround him that are connected to him, like Mary Jane, or like Venom, or any of these other ones, are constantly being sabotaged. And editorial, like basically the people above the writers, the people who run things at Marvel Comics, they've made comments in the past about things like it's better for comic books to be talked about because people are mad than not talked about at all, and comments kind of around the idea of like controversy is better than no speaking. And that's where I think a lot of this comes from. The idea of, oh shit, like comic books don't sell like they used to back in the day. They still sell, but a lot of people don't even bother reading anymore. So we got to be controversial to sell stuff. We have to have 50 cover variants and we have to be controversial. And that's something that has now bled over into Venom. Venom is a character that is important to a lot of people. I'd argue much more important than it is to some of the writers who have worked on him. And Venom in general is a complex character because you have the symbiote, which is essentially most easiest referred to as the Venom symbiote, and then you have Eddie Brock. Now, over the years, they've kind of passed these symbiotes around like joints at a party, where pretty much everybody's always getting some new symbiote or someone's getting some new bond, etc. And that's something that is now happening in Marvel Comics with the all-new Venom, where they have decided that Venom should be none other than Mary Jane Watson. Yeah. That's how far we've sunk in terms of Venom and in terms of the Spider-Man comics. Like, there is no ideas for a lot of these characters. And even when something is mildly interesting, it's going to be thrown out in the future. Some people are going to say immediately, well, then why do you buy them? I don't buy them anymore. If I ever read them, I have not purchased them. Okay, you can go to the comic book store, you could open a comic book, there's a lot of websites online, not encouraging you, just telling you they're out there. The 616 Spider-Man comic books have mostly been not worth buying for years. That said, Venom was an exception. Venom was still very good for multiple runs previously, many of which I actually did purchase and supported those comic books because the writers were trying. Unfortunately now, we've hit a point where because of all the stuff going on, like I mentioned in previous videos, which if you haven't watched, I do recommend you check out for the background, but basically with Mary Jane and all this stupidity around her ending up with this other guy, and now becoming Jackpot, and now becoming Venom, they're throwing everything at the wall around Mary Jane, and Venom as a character is paying the price for it, even though he's a very fascinating character. But I do have a question of the day for you, which is, what is the stupidest or dumbest or most ridiculous decision you've seen made with comic book characters? This can be, well, I think this character should have ended at this issue, all the stories after suck. It can be, oh, well, this character murdered this person, it was out of character, whatever. Like, I'm interested in it. For a lot of people, it's One More Day with the Peter Parker Mephisto deal, where he sold his marriage. And that's something that I think has bled into all of these other comic books. And that's kind of where we're going with Venom. Now, Venom is not a two-dimensional character by any means. He started out as a Spider-Man villain, and he has since become very, very iconic for also being a character in his own right. Yeah, at first it was Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote, and these two were essentially bonded over their hatred of Spider-Man. But over the years, they've formed an alliance with Spider-Man. They've come to terms with the fact that they actually do want to be good, even though they can be misguided as a character, right? This character is not a throwaway character. It's not just some Z-lister that somebody made as a joke that's been stupid for years. This is a character with actually a lot of meaningful stories. And in recent years, you've had runs like Cates' run, and I believe Ewing's run, and some of these other people who have done really interesting stuff with the King in Black and all these other things around the symbiote lore that have built up the symbiotes in ways that previously I think people thought they couldn't be. I think there had been a couple decades there where it kind of felt like the lore around the symbiotes was pretty dead. Like, there was stuff out there, but nobody really wanted to explore it. There wasn't really a huge interest in it. Venom got some comics, but he wasn't a big focus. Now, when the Venom movies came around from Sony, which are kind of garbage, but they're really fun garbage, I think. Like, they're just silly, fun films. They did put a little bit of focus back on Venom, which I think did help kickstart more comic book focus for him. But nowadays, it seems that they don't know what to do with him, because they've pretty much split up Eddie Brock and the symbiote, and also split up Dylan Brock and the symbiote, you know, Eddie's son, who was bonded with the symbiote as well, and they've instead decided to give it to Mary Jane Watson. Now, Mary Jane is a character that there's been no direction on for a very long time, and in fact, she's a character that I personally think has outstayed her welcome. I know there's some people who are going to say, well, Peter and MJ should get back together. Well, you know, this is ridiculous. Why do they not do this? To those people, I say there is the ultimate comic book line, the ultimate universe. The current writers and the current editorial could not care less what you think. I mean, I agree with you. Like, MJ was supposed to be Peter's true love, right? She was supposed to be, you know, this character that he was destined to be with, and he'd have his daughter, and that was even alluded to in Nick Spencer's comic book run, and it's something that mattered to a lot of people for a long time. You had Lois Lane and Clark Kent, that was one of the biggest couples in comics, and you had Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson was, on the other side, one of the biggest couples in comics. A character like Mary Jane mattered outside of Peter as a human being, but also their dynamic together as a family was extremely important. Now, somewhere down the line, Marvel decided that this was not relatable, and as you had writers like Nick Spencer, who did very obviously actively work to try and bring these characters back together, there's a lot of weird stuff that happened around the end of his comic book run. He was teasing them having a daughter again, he was teasing the Mephisto stuff, and then all of a sudden he's mysteriously leaving Marvel and going to work on something else. Was he pushed off of the work? I don't really know, but I do know that he was offered a deal by Substack, which does comics, and essentially left the company, and it did seem like there was editorial meddling in what he wanted to do. I'd be interested if at some point I could speak to him, pick his mind or something like that, and see if there was other ideas he had, because in general, he was a writer around Spider-Man who did those characters justice in recent years. But unfortunately, with the Mary Jane stuff, there was all of these different events that were just really stupid, where she got shoved into an alternate universe. Then she ended up with this guy named Paul. We've made jokes about Paul. We've ad nauseum talked about that character in previous videos, who feels like a self-insert man bun type hipster character that was thrown into the mix by some editor who wanted to be with MJ. I mean, that's what it feels like. It's just a self-insert. And so a lot of people at that point realized, oh, these comics are kind of garbage. Like, there's no permanent stakes. Everything is always back and forth. Will they, won't they? They're always throwing things in and out. Even right now, Peter Parker, at least a few issues ago, was back with Black Cat. Where, you know, and where I've stood in for a while is I've said, hey, if you really don't want to put MJ and Peter back together, because they've said several times they don't want to, and recently a bigwig editor, executive, who just kind of came off like a prick to me, essentially made a big deal about how people who want that should buy Ultimate because they're not going to do that ever, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to put Peter and MJ back together. They don't care that people found it relatable. Well, you know, with all of these comments around these characters, you're even looking at a character like Felicia, Black Cat, who I would say at this point, it's like, just have Peter date her, give him some stability with that, then he has another person with an alter ego in his life, and you can go about your day. But even with that change, we know that they will eventually throw this rebound out again. And that's kind of the state comic books as a whole have been in their mainline universe, but especially Spider-Man comics. The thing is, though, that with Venom, with those multiple good runs, you know, with all of this lore added to the symbiotes, with all of these interesting character developments, there was a lot going on for Venom. And even with the Venom War arc, you know, the crossover arc, which a lot of people didn't like, there was a lot going on for Venom. Now, one thing that's very interesting about what's happening with ruining Venom is that it doesn't even make any sense. You know, yeah, you have all the stuff with MJ and Paul, you have all the stuff with Peter and Felicia, you have all the stuff with Will They, Won't They, you have all the stuff with the symbiotes ending up with different hosts. I mean, hey, right now, interesting story, Eddie Brock is bonded to the Carnage symbiote. It's actually kind of interesting. It's a little bit like Dexter Morgan style, where he's trying to keep this symbiote in check and use it for good, but it's very clearly deranged and evil. That's kind of an interesting arc with the symbiote. So Eddie Brock is at least still getting something in a different book. But when it comes to Venom, the Venom symbiote, I should say, and the identity of Venom, they had started pushing this all-new Venom storyline for many months. And it was a mystery, essentially. And there were all of these different characters teased, like, oh, who could it be? Could it be this character? Could it be this character? Could it be none of them? Could it still be Eddie and we just don't know it? And that was a tease for a while that I actually thought could be fun. You know, it could have been an interesting story, but around issue 3 or 4, it started to become very apparent that they were making it look like it was Paul as either a joke or as an FU to the fans, at which point a lot of people just started tuning out and saying this is stupid. Regardless, later on, some unsung hero, even though I normally don't like leaks, leaked images of Mary Jane coming out of the Venom symbiote and saying, hey, it's Mary Jane. You know, like, I got my hands on a comic, it's Mary Jane. And there were other people making videos about this, which, bless them, you know, I've been kind of pissed about it. I didn't, because I was worried that it was going to be a bait and switch. You know, this was a comic book that comes out in a couple days. I was worried, okay, well, what if they're just, you know, showing this image and it's not Photoshop, but what if it's Marvel just being a bag of dicks? Like, what if they're making a joke, you know, and they're just being like, oh yeah, look, what if it was Mary Jane, and having the symbiote appear that way or something? And I was like, okay, well, other people can make this video, and if it turns out to not be her, I don't want to look like an idiot. You know, like, I didn't want it to be a bait and switch. I got mad, and then it turned out it wasn't her. But then because of the leaks, like, I thought Marvel would stay quiet. They actually went ahead and released information about it. Like, they released something, it was about 17 hours ago when I record this, on March 31st, where they were saying, hey, look, this is the all-new Venom's identity. It actually is Mary Jane. Here's the spoiler cover of Mary Jane coming out of the Venom symbiote. Here's all this stuff going on. There's a few different variants of Mary Jane as Venom. And here's the thing. There could be an interesting storyline in here. There could, if Peter and MJ were still together. And here's why I say that. The Venom symbiote, and Venom in general, traumatized Mary Jane. She was borderline tortured and scared to death by them when Venom came to basically get revenge on Peter in an early appearance and attack Peter. And so she has always hated the symbiote in a way. Like, it's always scared her. She's always had a thing against it. In fact, I mean, you know, recently in the last year, Peter put the symbiote back on temporarily because he kind of had to, and Mary Jane berated him, even though they weren't together at the time, basically saying, you know what this suit does to you, you know what all of these things are going to do to you. It's something where it doesn't make any sense for MJ to be the host of Venom. It makes no sense. Like, this is not a character that she cares for. This is not a character that she wanted to be anywhere near. In fact, it got to the point in the original comics where Peter was wearing a cloth black suit, like a version of the symbiote suit. At least it was the same look, I should say, aesthetically as the symbiote, and she didn't like that because she was so horrified by the symbiote that she didn't even want to see him in that in the comics. And that's the character that you've made the all-new Venom. Another thing that's ridiculous about this is the body type of Venom. Why does she look like a man? Now look, here, I'm a pretty accepting guy, okay? You know, like, you got all these issues going on in the world with all this real life stuff. I'm pretty lackadaisical of like, hey, you know what? Do what you want. But Venom in general, when, as far as I know, unless I'm forgetting someone, which I very well could be, whenever a woman has worn the symbiote did adapt to their body. Now, that doesn't mean it was weaker or it was tiny, but it just meant it looked feminine, right? Like, it adapted to that character's body. So now we have a Venom who is really manly looking with MJ's face plastered on him. And I don't understand what's going on. You know, I can accept, like, at first I was mad about Eddie Brock. At first, because Eddie Brock is a character in mainline continuity I actually do still care about. There's very few, by the way. Very few. Daredevil would be another one. But Eddie Brock is one I still care about, who I think is a salvageable good character. He had all these runs with the King in Black. He had, you know, runs with his son. All of this different stuff going on. And I am just shocked to see the writer of this going in this direction, because he's also done other Venom stuff that I thought was good in the past. And it's really, really frustrating, because it's like, I could understand Venom being a character who, how do I say this? I could understand Eddie Brock leaving the Venom symbiote to do something else. Like, the fact that he has kind of nothing left, and, you know, right now he has lost a lot of his power and stuff, and now he is working with the Carnage symbiote, I think is actually interesting. I find that an interesting story. In fact, I will read that. I don't have any interest in this, though. But I don't understand what they're doing with characters like MJ. I don't understand what they're doing with characters like the Venom symbiote, who is very clearly its own person. I just don't get it. I mean, is it possible at this point that Marvel is lying again and this is a fake out? Yeah, it's totally possible. Like, you know, you could get to issue 6 or 7 of this thing and it could be, oh, actually, it's not her. Like, this was all just a joke. It was a stupid one, but it was a joke, and that's not what it is at all. And to that, I would say, well, it's a dumb joke. It's a very dumb joke if that's, you know, what they're doing. I kind of think that this really is what it is. I kind of think that they really are just ruining the Venom symbiote, that this really is MJ. It doesn't make sense with her trauma. It doesn't make sense with the body type of the character. It doesn't make sense because Ewing was doing this really cool stuff before this. Like, was it as good as Donny Cates' run? People argue about that. I don't really know. I liked them both a lot. I liked his writing. And now it just kind of feels like a hack job if this is the way you've gone. I don't understand why you'd want to go from writing such cool stuff to this. I didn't even know it was him at first on All New Venom. I never really paid attention to who the writer was. I was just kind of like, oh yeah, this redesign for the Venom symbiote. So Venom's, you know, a different character at this point. Who knows who he is? Maybe it'll be interesting, maybe it won't. Then they were teasing the Paul stuff, and I was like, oh, please God help me. And then they got to this point, and it's like, it's just another Spider-Man thing that I feel like is being ruined. Again, is it possible that things course correct? Yeah, it's possible. Like, let's say that even though they don't want Peter and MJ together with Editorial, let's say that they put Peter permanently with Felicia. I would love that. I think that would be great. I think you could tell some good stories with those characters, and we could leave this dark era of dumb garbage behind us. Or let's say that with Venom, you know, it's maybe not actually MJ, and it's not Paul, and this was all an elaborate joke. It wasn't released on April Fool's, so that leads me to believe it wasn't, but let's say it was, and it's actually a different character and it's very interesting. You can do that. I would say your joke was stupid and in poor taste, but I would concede, okay, they didn't actually ruin this character, right? They made it look like they were ruining the character, and then they changed it. Now, at the end of the day, does any of this matter? I mean, it's comic books, right? I know there's going to be that one person who's like, none of this matters. It's just a comic. It doesn't matter at all. You're taking it too seriously. But these characters do matter to people. And even though there has been a lot of turnover with creative decisions where, like, not everything is permanent, and a lot of characters do change, and a lot of characters do reverse, and all this stuff, I think the reason it makes me mad is because this is the latest in a long line of Spider-adjacent characters to be ruined by decisions that are either by writers or by editorial or production, whatever it is, you know, whoever's making these calls. I don't know at this point how much creative control writers have on Spider books. I know that there are rules that they cannot break. Things like getting Peter married to MJ again. They can't break those rules. So I know that their stuff is looked over. But like when you look at the list of characters I went through, like MJ, like Peter, like Felicia, just getting the shaft, not even in the good way, just getting kind of shoved to the side. You have characters like Venom now. You have characters as well, actually, even around Spider-Man. Like, for example, there was one I was just thinking of, Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly got ruined completely. Turned into Chasm, could have been an interesting little side story, then ended up just being something that basically ruined the character for the last few years. I think that the reason this bothers me is I grew up reading Spider-Man comics, you know? And I always thought that one day I want to write these comic books. It was actually my dream when I was a kid. At one point I wanted to be an astronaut, at another point I wanted to be a comic book writer. I ended up as a dumb YouTuber. Like, where child me, I could look at these characters, and I could even look at things like Superior Spider-Man and say, wow, this is a new idea, this is interesting, I know it won't be forever, I like it for what it is. But I can't look at things like this through the lens of a child or an adult and see anything except a ridiculous, at best, disrespectful joke to people who do care about the characters, and at worst, complete butchering of the characterization of the Venom symbiote, of Mary Jane herself, a bastardization of one of pop culture's biggest relationships of all time with Peter and MJ. No matter how you look at it, the reason it bothers me is these characters mattered to me growing up a lot, and these characters matter a lot to a lot of people. And you have these executives and editors running around, running their mouth, saying stuff like, oh, well, actually, the reason people are buying Ultimate Spider-Man, it's not actually because of the relationship with MJ. It's actually a lot more complicated than that, and you're just an idiot. Basically saying stuff like that and gaslighting you. And you have writers who, like Ewing, I thought was a good writer. Like, I don't really understand what he's doing here. I really hope that this is just a dumb bait and switch. I'd still think it's dumb, but I wouldn't think he's a bad writer. But like this, if this is the direction you're going, it's so out of character for everybody that even if you wrote a compelling story around it, I don't think it would be good writing. You know, and my final thought on this is there is a way that they could have done a story here, which I meant to say earlier, but I just got so upset. If Peter and MJ were still together, there is a way they could have done this. You know, they could have had Peter reconcile with the symbiote further. I always thought that he could have had an on-again, off-again hosting relationship with that symbiote because it does help him, and it does want to help him. And I think that in that way, if you had MJ bond with the symbiote temporarily to kind of get over her trauma, this would be in a family setting. There is something you could do there, where the symbiote is not a bridge between them, but like gets reconciliation with everybody involved. There's a way you could do that from the past of comic book lore and history that would respect the history, move the characters forward through character development that could then be ongoing, and then leave the Venom symbiote open to still work with Eddie Brock, who is Venom. That's the character people care about as Venom. They don't prefer Mac, they don't prefer any of these other characters, they prefer Eddie. And so to constantly pass the symbiotes around, to constantly move them, to constantly do these kinds of things and make these decisions that feel very out of character, it feels insulting to people who do still care. It feels insulting to people who do still spend their money on these comics, and it's really just disappointing. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm interested in that. If you want to help support this channel, we have an Amazon affiliate link where I've got comic books and stuff like that there. If you purchase, they do help support the channel. We also have our own store, cosmobunny.shop, where we sell coasters, keychains, trays, and more made out of recycled paper from comic books, manga, magazines, and more. These books are damaged, they're unable to be sold, and what we do is we take these books, we take the paper that can be saved, and we turn it into something new for your home. Discount code DJAY123 gets you 10% off your first purchase there, and that is also the same code that works for Fortnite to actually help support our channel over there. New channel membership videos and all kinds of stuff like that have been going up, so I appreciate those of you who have supported in that way. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.